Welcome back to the Wreck and Silence Review Show. It's the last week of November, and that means we have one final jazz album review for the month. Now, last week we reviewed Dean Martin's 1957 classic, Pretty Baby. This week we'll be reviewing not just another classic album, but my favorite album from my favorite singer of all time. I'm referring to Frank Sinatra's 1955 classic, In the Wee Small Hours. Now, I'd like to take a few moments to discuss some of the history pertaining to this project before we get into the actual review. Recorded from February 8th to March 4th of 1955, and released on Capitol Records with production by Voy Gilmore and arrangements by the legendary Nelson Riddle, this truly was lightning in a bottle. Now, by the early 1950s, Sinatra's career had been in a downward spiral for some time. His teen Bobby Soxer audience had lost interest in him as he entered his late 30s, and in 1951 he went so far as to attempt suicide and was dropped by Columbia Records later that year. But 2 years later, in 1953, A&R at Capitol Records, Al Livingston, going against the wishes of his colleagues, signed Sinatra to a 7-year deal, which proved to be massively fruitful for both his film and music career. By the time of the initial recording sessions for In the Wee Small Hours, Sinatra had experienced the end of several failed relationships. He separated from his first wife, Nancy Barbado, on Valentine's Day 1950, and while still married, he began a relationship with actress Ava Gardner. After he and Barbado divorced in October 1951, he married Gardner just 10 days later, but they were both jealous of each other's extramarital affairs. The relationship deteriorated. Gardner left Sinatra 2 months after the release of the film From Here to Eternity, and they divorced in 1957. It's assumed that this album's grouping of love gone bad songs and Sinatra's poignant renderings were a direct result of his failing relationship with Gardner, to the point that these are called Ava songs. Riddle credited Sinatra's loss of Gardner with his ability to sing the type of songs contained in this album. The failure of his relationship did not shatter Sinatra, but instead caused him to sing more emotionally. In the midst of these personal disturbances, Frank began selecting songs for the new album. He would rehearse each one of them reiteratively at home with Bill Miller, his pianist. All the songs on the album deal with themes such as loneliness, introspection, melancholy, desolation, lost love, failed relationships, depression, and nightlife. The cover artwork reflects these themes, portraying Sinatra alone on an eerie and deserted city street at night, awash in blue-tinged streetlights. Frank had been contemplating the idea for this album as far back as 1946, when his first album, The Voice, was released, and this was his highest-selling album since his sophomore release, Songs by Sinatra, from 1947. In fact, this album sold so well that it helped popularize the 12-inch LP, with the 10-inch record succumbing to extinction by the end of the 1950s. The album was designed as a concept album from the very start. Now, this was a rather unusual approach, as albums from the time period tended to be little more than collections of singles. His sessions intended for this album release to be more serious, artistically. In the Wee Small Hours was recorded before stereophonic technology existed, but the fidelity of the monophonic album evokes a feeling of warmth to the modern ears. The sessions were recorded in Studio C, which is located in the basement of the Capitol building, which was a smaller studio designed to record small ensembles. These sessions would start at 8 p.m., continuing past midnight. Nelson Riddle commented on Sinatra's work ethic and its effect on his arrangements and the studio orchestra by saying, "You have to be right on the metal all the time. The man himself somehow draws everything out of you, and he has the same effect on the boys in the band. They know he means business, so they pull everything out." Sinatra was meticulous about the quality of the sessions for In the Wee Small Hours. Guitarist George Van Epps recalls Frank stopping a session after only singing a few notes because he felt his voice didn't have the right sound at the time. The session was rescheduled for the following night, and the vocal take came out perfectly. Sinatra also carefully sequenced the songs with input from Miller and Riddle, for the LP, as he personally referred to this as the Ava album. Sinatra's voice was maturing at this point, and he had matured musically regarding annotation and vocal shading. He had also become more comfortable with improvising rhythmically within the confines of Riddle's arrangements. Now, slight technical imperfections by Sinatra have been found in this recording, but the overall emotional effect compensates completely so that the listener attributes any shortcomings to the sincere human expression of the singer. With the exception of the title track, the songs are all from the Great American Songbook, but you would have easily been forgiven for assuming these songs were written by Frank himself with how personal the whole thing feels. This album is so good that I have an original pressing of the vinyl in my record collection, another version of the vinyl framed in my studio, hanging over my MPC where I produce my hip-hop beats, and the cover is tattooed on my lower right arm in black ink. With that bit of information out of the way, let's dive into our review of Sinatra's magnum opus, In the Wee Small Hours. The first song is the title track, In the Wee Small Hours.
In the wee small hours of the morning.
Now, I remember stumbling upon this song for the first time back in 2009 when I downloaded Sinatra's entire discography from the Pirate Bay torrenting site. The first few seconds draw you in immediately, setting the tone for the entire album. Back when I was just rapping and before I learned how to produce circa 2011, I had paid a producer to make a beat for me sampling this song. It's impossible for your mind not to picture everything Frank is saying here. The lyrics, along with the melancholy melody, paint such a vivid picture that you completely lose yourself in the music. Get ready, because you're going to sit comfortably in that void for the rest of this album's runtime. I give this one a 10 out of 10. The next song is called Mood Indigo.
You ain't been blue.
The transition from the first song to this one is so seamless that you'd be forgiven for not noticing the previous track had ended and the next had begun. God, this song really gives me the chills. My mind is already turning that vivid image into a vivid film. By In the evening, when the lights are low, I'm so lonely, I could cry. What else can I say? 10 out of 10. The next song is called Glad to Be Unhappy.
Look at yourself. If you had a sense of humor, you would laugh to beat the band.
Piano melody is so beautiful. My God, this song. I see that same man, still restless, picking up his glass of scotch, walking over to a piano in the corner of that living room as he lights another cigarette with an additional ashtray already awaiting him as if this is a set routine. He sits down and begins to play and sings this song. My God, this is pure Sinatra. This is like looking into the man's soul. I mean, he's played various characters like this all throughout his film career, so it's no surprise that some of that authenticity stems from truthful experience. As the cold draft creeps inside from the cold autumn, it's just a man in a corner, alone, with no one to keep him company but his pain. I give this one another 10 out of 10. The next song is called I Get Along Without You Very Well.
What a guy. What a fool.
An hour has passed, maybe more. He's not really certain and could care less. He's down half a pack of cigarettes and on his fourth scotch. He's not even bothering with the rocks anymore, it's just neat now. He's in a stage of denial, trying to convince himself that he's better off in his current state, hence the song's name. But quickly it switches from his nonchalant confidence to a tone of ugly realization when he says, I get along without you very well, yes I do, except when soft rain falls and drips from leaves, then I recall the thrill of being sheltered in your arms, of course I do. Every time he repeats the title of the song, he's quickly confronted with the fact that he can never escape his sorrow, as there's always something around the corner to serve as a stark reminder. Another great song here. I give this one another 10 out of 10. The next song is called Deep in a Dream.
I dim all the lights and I sink in my chair.
A bit more time has passed, but time may as well be suspended at this point. He's foregone the glass, having gone straight to the source, and he's 2/3 through the bottle. He's down 2 packs of cigarettes and a quarter cigar to boot. He's fallen asleep at the piano, head lying low, resting on one arm while still cradling the bottle close, while the other arm is sprawled out across the piano keys. He's drifted off to another world, one not too distant from this hellish reality he's currently living in. I would call it a sleepwalking nightmare. Now, for anyone watching and listening to this, I have a question. Have you ever been so fucked up on substances that it feels like you're consciously sleepwalking through that night's events? Let me know in the comment section if you feel comfortable with sharing. I know this sounds a tad odd and it's a bit difficult to explain, but the best way I can describe it is, when I was around 15 to 16 years old, 2007, 2008, I used to have a nightly habit of taking 2 Ambien pills with a glass of gin on the rocks every night. I did this for close to 2 years until around early 2010, about 5 months before my 18th birthday, and then I completely stopped cold turkey. The feeling you experience under the influence of those substances are like a walking daydream. You feel like there's no floor beneath you for the first few minutes. Then you stabilize momentarily and realize that you're still very much awake, but there's this out-of-body feeling you have for the rest of the night that you can't quite explain. And I swear to Christ that the phrase out-of-body experience is really the only way to describe this shit. It literally feels like what you see in that scene from Spider-Man Far From Home where Doctor Strange knocks Parker out of his body. Yeah, it's the closest real-life feeling you'll ever get to that without some comic book shit actually happening to you. It's like you're aware of what your body is doing and that you're driving its actions, but you feel empty and hollowed out while the soul of your very being watches from afar. It's like taking the films Requiem for a Dream and Clockwork Orange and putting them into a blender and then jumping into that concoction of insanity yourself. That's what I imagine this person is experiencing between the moments of the previous song and the beginning of this one. His still-lit cigarette burns his hand and jolts him out of his sleep. He slowly emerges from it and slogs over to the kitchen to make a cup of coffee. But none of this is actually occurring. The man is still very much asleep at the piano, but in this dream state he's unaware of the distance as he watches himself from the corner, while simultaneously going about his business. Overall, another strong entry to this album. I give this one another 10 out of 10. The next song is called I See Your Face Before Me.
Crowding my every dream.
He sits at the table, slowly stirring in some cream with his coffee. He stares across at the open chair across from him. He pictures her there, remembering better times of late night and early morning conversations. If only for a few moments, nothing else seems real. Nor does any of it matter because he's fully immersed in the happier memories of the past before it fades from his grasp once again. I give this song another 10 out of 10. The next song is called Can't We Be Friends?
I thought I'd found the girl of my dreams.
After reality rears its ugly head once more, he pours a bit more of that remaining scotch into his empty coffee cup. He starts preparing himself for the inevitable "can't we be friends" conversation that he knows is coming in due time. Sinatra's approach here is one of aggressive frustration in the beginning, before segueing into a seething melancholy. He's pretty much given up at this point, while lamenting the fact that he was no saint in said relationship himself, almost like saying to himself, "Karma's a bitch, isn't it, old man?" I give this one another 10 out of 10. The next song is called When Your Lover Has Gone.
What good is the scheming, the planning?
He sinks even lower here. With no one to serenade but his own sorrow, the two seem attached at the hip, destined to be permanent companions for the rest of time. Frank really lays himself bare on this one. Like faded flowers, love doesn't mean anything when your lover has gone. Another really strong song here. I give this one another 10 out of 10. The next song is called What Is This Thing Called Love? It's 4:45 in the morning and businesses will be opening in a little over an hour. He feels the need for some fresh air, so he throws on his overcoat and fedora and heads outside. It isn't quite dawn yet, and he decides to take a walk to the diner a few blocks away. He left the bottle inside, but he keeps his flask close in his inner pocket of his overcoat next to his cigarettes, two things he never leaves the home without. There's nothing before him but a moonlit path littered with regret. This one feels like a scene out of a film noir. The beginning sets that tone immediately. Another really good song here. I give this one another 10 out of 10. The next song is called Last Night When We Were Young.
Last night when we were young.
As he continues along that path, he stops for a moment and takes a seat on a nearby bench. He lifts the brim of his fedora, takes a swig of his flask, lights his cigarette, and looks up at the moon, again reflecting on better times. Last night when we were young, love was a star, a song unsung. Life was so new, so real, so right. Ages ago, last night. There's nothing left to say. 10 out of 10. The next song is called I'll Be Around. As he continues his walk, he pays particular attention to his surroundings, helpless to weather the flow of memories that come rushing in. Those beginning notes get me every time. He pretty much says that he'll wait around in hopes that someday love can be rekindled, regardless of how long it may take. I give this one another 10 out of 10. The next song is called Ill Wind.
Blow, ill wind, blow away.
He can see the diner in the distance, but he's not quite there yet. The sorrow is becoming more and more unbearable in each passing moment, and all he wants to do is be at ease. So ill wind, blow away. Let me rest today. You're blowing me no good. There's a real smooth horn section in the latter part of the song, and it's so melancholic and expressive. Riddle's arrangements are so goddamn good, I cannot praise his work enough. 10 out of 10. The next song is called It Never Entered My Mind.
Once I laughed when...
He reaches the diner, but decides to smoke one last cigarette before going inside. When he finally does, he notices only 3 people spread out throughout the establishment, faces hidden behind the newspapers they're reading, quietly keeping to themselves. He takes a seat at one of the bar stools at the front counter, and doesn't see a waitress in sight, so he sluggishly reaches over to the left to ring the service bell. A few moments pass, and no response. He rings twice more, and yet no response. Then after the third ring, a waitress emerges from the kitchen. She comes closer, but her face is blurred. As he tries to make out what it is, or who it is, she finally reaches him, and he slowly awakes at his piano back at the house, no longer deep in a dream. Dawn is broken, he situates himself in his recliner, and gets lost in his thoughts. Once I laughed when I heard you say that I'd be playing solitaire, uneasy in my easy chair. It never entered my mind. Another 10 out of 10. We're down to the final 3 songs of the album. The next song is called Dancing on the Ceiling.
The world is lyrical because a miracle has brought my love.
He heads back upstairs again, finishing the rest of that scotch bottle, and sleeps for the rest of the day until it reaches night once again. And the process begins to repeat. It just presents itself in a slightly different form. He slowly begins to awake, but isn't fully there yet. In fact, he's still quite deep in a dream, but doesn't realize it at the moment. He stares up and all he sees are memories of the past projecting on the ceiling like a film reel. She dances on the overhead, on the ceiling, near my bed, in my sight all through the night. This is one of the very best songs on the album. I'm getting chills right now thinking about it. Another 10 out of 10. The next song is called I'll Never Be the Same.
I'll never be the same. Stars have...
He awakes, does his morning routine, and takes a hard look at himself in the bathroom mirror, as he begins to come to terms with the fact that his experiences have wounded him so deeply that the damage is totally irreparable. I'll never be the same. Stars have lost their meaning for me. I'll never be the same. Nothing's what it once used to be. I give this one another 10 out of 10. And the final song is titled This Love of Mine.
This love of mine.
They couldn't have picked a better song to end this album with. This is the final moment, the complete resignation from any potential chance at happiness. He has nothing more to give, and he couldn't love again if he wanted to, as that feeling is foreign to him now. It's been replaced by endless pain and sorrow, deeper than the river Nile, pulling him under a bit more each passing moment. I give this one another 10 out of 10. What else can I say? I think I've said it all. This album is such a masterwork of art that this review turned into a short story that my mind concocted while listening to it for the review. Mr. Royal Gilmore, Mr. Nelson Riddle, all of the band members of the orchestra, and of course, Mr. Francis Albert Sinatra. Bravo, everyone. I cannot praise your work enough, and I sincerely thank you for leaving us this masterpiece of music. Know that your work has touched and influenced generations of artists and musicians who will carry on your legacy. I spoke last week about Seth MacFarlane carrying the torch forward for this style of music, and even he stated himself that this is his favorite album of all time. So wherever your spirits reside now, know that you left your mark and made a significant difference in bettering the creative arts. Rest in peace, folks. I highly recommend this album to everyone. Even if you know nothing about jazz, I still highly suggest you give this album a listen. I promise you, you'll come out of it a slightly different person than you were before. I give this album a full 10 out of 10. I'd like to take this time to thank my editor. Your hard work is always much appreciated, and I couldn't do this without you. And I'd like to thank you all for your time as well. I hope you all enjoyed this review, and I hope you all have enjoyed this autumn season and the cooler weather and warmer colors it's brought us all. Join me next week as we start December off right with a review of the soundtrack to the classic Rankin Bass stop-motion special, 1964's Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. I'm particularly excited for that one. Until then, everyone, be safe, be happy, and take care of yourselves and each other. Goodbye.